People are continually moving in different directions. Some go north and some move south. Some are moving up and some down. Some people have to work at getting where they're trying to go. For some it's a snap, and yet others can't make it. The problems that beset us can be of all kinds. They can be habits which bother us or bother others. They can be emotional or social. They can be physical handicaps. If you'd like to get somewhere, regardless of where you are now or how you got there, these sessions are directed at you.
The title of this show is, Where Do We Go From Here? Dr. Goldiamond, I know you've thought a great deal about the title. What exactly led you to choose that question?
Well, that was a question which I found to be extremely useful when I was in the hospital and found out that I would be using a wheelchair probably for the rest of my life instead of my legs.
Well, isn't that a very shocking discovery? Doesn't that really set you back?
Oh, I was already on my back, flat on my back, as a matter of fact.
Nowhere else to go?
Nowhere else to go. And if I had dwelt on that setback, I'd still be there. Instead, I sort of asked myself the question of, here I am, where do I go from here? I sort of knew where I wanted to be. And now, after asking the question, where do I go from here, the next question came, well, how do I get there? And I tried to figure out different ways to get back, or to try to get back.
Well, you mean you made up a program as you went along?
Well, little programs along, and I was soon so busy trying to figure out what to do that I didn't concentrate or think about, gee, what I now can't do.
If we're talking here about the physical, the emotional, the behavioral problems, getting along with people, involving probably an infinite number of things now, aren't we taking on a big order here for an 8-session program?
This is a big order for a lifetime, not just 8 sessions. What we're going to talk about is an approach which has found to be useful in developing individualized and highly flexible programs in a whole variety of areas. Now, we certainly can't tell each of you what to do, nor can I tell you what to do. Some of the problems may be simple, that is, some of the programs, and we'll be using that word instead, some of the programs may be simple, some will require more work, and some will require the assistance of a professional. But even in this case, the professional is part of the program. He is there to help you get what you want and what you need, given what you are right now. And we have to assess then, where do we go from here?
Well, now that's still a big order, so how do we go about that in a systematic way?
You're right on target. You're asking exactly the right questions. We're going to try to teach people to ask the right questions of themselves and the world around them in a systematic way.
You mean, and since each of us is different, we'll have our own answers?
Yes, we will, and each of us is going to be different, too. This program is addressed not only to the person who would like to program things for himself, but to the person's family, to his friends, and to those who work with him. This is our audience in terms of developing programs in a systematic way.
This approach has been used by Dr. Goldiamond to help people with a variety of complaints. Here he describes an unhappy family situation. Actors reenact this scene.
The case is that of a woman, aged 29, who a few years ago had married a widower with a son of 7, and came for help because she and the boy could simply not get along, and this was affecting her marriage. As we shall see, there were other problems as well. She wanted the child's behavior changed, but since we hadn't discussed things with him, our contract was to teach her a constructional approach to the boy. One of the problems was that every week on Friday, he came in after play with his blue jeans ripped and she was beside herself with fury at what she regarded as continual provocation.
Billy, what happened to your pants? Are you going to answer me? What happened to your pants? Okay, go to your room. Hello, Billy.
As you can notice, she showed concern only when his pants were ripped on Friday. I said, how about kissing him on the head when he comes in with his pants unripped on the other 6 days? She said, I can't do that. I hate him. Wow. Remember, he's her stepson, and all kinds of marital problems are involved. We could go into this further, but let's take the assumption that people can intensely dislike others who interfere with them, who create extra work for them, with whom they fail, and so on. The task was to get pleasant relations going and to produce joint success. Rather than concentrating on his messy room, which was beyond her control, and for those of us who have children whom we love, their rooms are often beyond our control, I asked what goes almost well, that with a teeny bit of effort we can make perfect. She said, he loves to set the table for his father, but he always messes it up.
Billy, how many times do I have to tell you how to set the table? Did we just go through this last night? Okay, now, this is the way I want it done from now on. Get it? Do that. Let me see that you can do it.
This is something he likes to do, and we might start developing success relations between them right here. I suggested that she set the table completely, but leave out something rather obvious, like the forks and the napkins. Let him do this and take the credit for it.
Hi, Billy.
Hi, Dad. Hi, Frank.
Hi.
Guess who set the table for me tonight?
You had a caterer come in and do it.
Wrong.
You've hired a maid?
Nope.
It wasn't a cat.
Billy did it.
Billy?
Right.
Really? Well, it looks very nice.
Yeah.
Very good job.
Once the child has mastered the napkin and fork routine, the next thing to do is to leave out the napkin, fork, and other utensils and have him then put these in. All he has to now do is to add one little item, like the utensils. On the next go-around, we might leave out the dish. We would gradually leave out more and more so that he would learn step by step how to do it right until we come to the point where it is a bare table and he sets it all up from scratch.
Billy, you did it all by yourself.
Without being told?
Right.
Well, how about that?
The boy is now setting the table completely by himself, something he never could do before. He feels genuine pride in his accomplishments, and the father notices this and thanks him profusely and really heaps the praise on him. The child learned how to get this kind of valued praise through the help of the woman, and he naturally will look more kindly towards other instructions she might give him in the future with regard to other areas. About 8 weeks after this particular episode, in the course of which other things occurred, she came to my office and said, "Do you know, Billy came home today with his pants untorn, and I kissed him on the head." And I said, "My, that's wonderful, and that's a change. How come you did that?" And she said, "You know, he's a pretty nice kid."
The family members were making life miserable for each other. What are the usual alternatives when faced with such suffering?
Basically, when we're confronted with suffering, we can do three things, and sometimes quite successfully, or one of three things. One is we can eliminate the problem. For example, do some kind of surgery on it. Secondly is to alleviate the problem, say taking pills to be able to live through it, or something of the sort. And thirdly, we have to sort of teach people to live with it. It's sometimes called positive thinking. But basically, you have these three ways. The problem is still with you, by and large, or the suffering.
Well, but what's wrong with that if you get rid of the suffering by getting rid of the problem?
Well, there's an alternative way of getting rid of the suffering.
What's that?
Well, try to find out what the person really wants out of life, which makes life meaningful for him. It's often the lack of those things which causes the suffering.
Well, I don't think I'm really clear on that. Can you give me an example?
Well, sure. Supposing, let's say, you've fallen down into a well. You're walking along, reading a book or something, then bloop, you're right down in the well. Well, one approach, the suffering in it, you start to scream for help and somebody sticks his head in. And one approach is to be sympathetic towards you. Gee, it must be awful in there.
Being in that well.
Yeah, you feel cold, I'll toss you down a blanket. You're hungry, I'll toss you down a sandwich. And actually, of course, that's not really what you're after.
It's not exactly what
you're after is, how do you get out of there? How do I get out of here? If the person up there has got a ladder or can go for help or something, or has a rope to toss down, that's fine. But if that doesn't occur, you've got to work things out for yourself. You've got to look around. Is there a ladder there? You can come up. Some wells have ladders. If they don't have ladders, is it mortar, bricks, and are the bricks sort of loose, and can you sort of climb up? If it's not that kind of thing, if it's made out of mud or something, can you look around? Maybe amidst all the kind of stuff floating in that water, there might be a piece of wood. Can you dig some little handholds in and try to climb up? And if there's nothing floating around the water that you can use, maybe you've got a nail file with you, or how are your fingernails, kid?
Well, you're saying that an alternative approach, in order, that kind of getting rid of the problem, requires a lot more thought.
Oh, yes, it requires planning, programming, and it's quite often tougher. That's why people would rather moan and gripe and complain about what's going on than trying to restore or trying to get the state of health or whatever it is that they're after. They look at it as, how can I eliminate this malfunction, the disease, and so on.
Al Parker of Chicago's Kennedy King College chose not to dwell on the fact that he has only one leg.
I didn't know anything about Othello, number one. I had heard about the play. I never saw it be done. So first thing I did, I got the book, and I went to the Resource Skills Center in Kennedy King College, and I started listening to the records. Number one, I wanted not to pattern myself. Laurence Olivier album was available, but for the voice quality, what type of voice were they using? You know, when they speak in their lower tones, and we'll go way down deep.
So what you were looking then is somebody who had successfully done the job, as judged by the fact that he was knighted and a few other things, and you decided you would learn from his behaviors what it was that you would be required to do, and you listened and tried to move your way up that. Yeah, that's very good.
Well, that's the way I attacked it. And after a while, the record, you know, it started to hamper me. You know, after about a month, it really started to, you know, to hamper me. I said, well, I don't need this any longer. I've developed a voice quality. Now I got to work with the character himself. And in portraying the character itself, it dealt in a lot of reading outside the play, as far as dealing with the Moors, to find out what type of people the Moors were.
Then must you speak of one that loved not wisely, but too well, of one not easily jealous, but being wroth, perplexed in the extreme, of one whose hand, like a based Indian, threw a pearl away, richer than all his tribes. Albeit, unuse it to the melting mood, set you down this. Say besides, where an Aleppo once, where a malignant and a turbaned Turk beat a Venetian and traduced the state. I took by the throat that circumcised dog and I smoked him thus.
Those approaches which Dr. Goldiamond calls pathological, which deal with the elimination of that which is causing the distress, lead us to concentrate on the problem. While this may help in some cases, it often provides no answer at all. Dr. Goldiamond was telling me earlier that when he got out of the hospital and wanted to return to work, being in a wheelchair was a problem. His office is located on the 3rd floor, and he had previously walked up the stairs, which were now impassable to him. Getting rid of the wheelchair, which was causing the distress, in a pathological sense, would have done no good. But by using an alternative approach, looking at what he wanted, i.e. to get to the office, he was able to work out a route which takes him through another entrance and up a freight elevator to his office. By concentrating on the development of a means of getting to his office, rather than his situation, he avoided distress. Identifying goals may often be difficult, and we're going to be dealing with that in the next session. But now let's find out more about what questions to ask when using an alternative approach.
Okay, now in general, where do we go from here can be broken down into 4 questions. Okay. The first question is, where do we want to go? The second question is, where are we now in relation to where we want to go? And the third is, how do we get from where we are now to where we want to go? And this is going to be by little steps quite often, in which each step is a small program which contains where we want to go, how we get there, and so on. And the fourth one is, how do we keep ourselves going through the process? What sort of motivates us? Now, approaches which use this type of questioning, asking these kinds of 4 questions, and trying to provide the answers in order to construct outcomes, I call such approaches constructional approaches. For example, would you like to step into my office?
Fine. This better be good. We rehearsed it. Hello. My name is Amanda Jones. I called earlier.
You were complaining about headaches and other problems?
Well, I haven't been sleeping very well, and I've been taking sleeping pills, and they're just not doing any good.
You had mentioned some other problems as well on the phone.
Well, you see, my husband's in the Foreign Service, and dear Henry has had him transferred to Moscow within 3 months. Now, I don't speak a word of Russian.
Well, anyway, at least he's not going to Siberia. Yes. Tell me now, have you tried to learn Russian?
Well, of course, but the alphabet's not the same, and I'm not too good at languages anyway, and every time I look at one word, I go into a complete tizzy, and I don't know what to do. What would you do if confronted by the woman for whom the Russian alphabet provides only upset and distress? We'll find out what Dr. Goldiamond's solution is in the next session. A pathological approach might deal with the reasons for the phobia. Try asking the questions which a constructional approach uses. Remember them? They are, first, where do we want to go? What is the goal? And what is it that you want out of life? Once we know that, the second question is, where are we now in relation to the goal? What can you do that is an approximation of your goal? What are your strengths or skills that you might be able to harness in trying to achieve the goal? Third, how do we get from where we are now to where we want to go? What is the program which will succeed in harnessing those strengths and skills and proceeding to the goal? Lastly, how do we keep going through the program? Good programming always takes this last question into account. Often, simply succeeding at each step is adequate. or maybe there are other rewards for finishing a step. Sometimes we have to build in motivation, relying on others to help us out.
In a future session, Dr. Goldiamond explains in detail how he and the staff of his Behavior Analysis Research Lab worked with stutterers. They came in sounding like this.
When I talk in unison with someone else, let's say, for instance, if you were to read a section of a paragraph and I would read the exact same section, I would talk at the same rate as you and I would keep up with you. Also, as I've said before, I can talk fine when I talk to Pete of a metronome because there's rhythm there. Also, I can also talk fine when I'm completely alone. If there's no one around or within earshot range, but for some reason I'm not as nervous and I can speak.
The objective of the program for John and his twin brother Jim was a new fluent speech pattern. They are not taught how not to stutter. Simply not speaking is one way of preventing stuttering. Instead, they were taught a fluent, natural-sounding pattern of speech. Here, John, part of the way through the program, talks with Dr. Goldiamond.
What's been happening with regard to your speech?
In regard to my speech, I find that I am more fluent and I can talk better in more difficult situations.
Well, you certainly do sound far more fluent now than when we...
I'm very nervous.
Well, if you're not nervous when you first face these things, you're really out of your cotton-picking mind if you're not nervous. I was once on my first TV program, I recall. I was teaching a course in Arizona, and I had to appear at a meeting. And so what happened was that I couldn't, hear myself, so I heard myself on tape. And I said, my God, I was stuttering all over the place. And so it's natural when you're like this. But I think with all your nervousness, you're doing very well. As the statement goes, if you speak like this when you're nervous, let's have more nervousness.
Okay.
So how are things going with your relations to Jack? Well, see, with Jim. Go.
My relationship with Jim
you're able to talk.
is coming along very well.
You're able to talk better to him? Or?
I have always been able to talk very well to him.
Yeah.
And now I find that I can talk even better.
Yeah. But you and he have had a kind of special thing going, haven't you?
Yes, we have.
Can you describe that special thing you had going between you?
I think the special thing is that we were born on the same day.
Yeah.
In other words, we're twins.
Yeah. But in terms of talking to each other, didn't you have a special language which you used with each other?
My parents tell me that when I was very young, that me and Jim had the same kind of speech that we said to each other.
Yeah. You may be following this series of 8 as a course for your personal use or amusement, or for both. Whichever, there are certain procedures which I think you should know about. First, Amanda and I will discuss a point and chew on it somewhat thoroughly. Then we will try to demonstrate it, either through dramatizations based on real-life experiences, or by presenting people who have developed actual programs and answers to certain problems that they had, or through presenting the programs themselves, or by demonstrations elsewhere.
And as you've seen, I'll then be summarizing the various points. And at that time, the main points will appear on the screen like this. If you're registered for the course, study manuals are also available. Okay. This first session is an introduction to the series and to the constructional approach. In the next session, we'll find out how Dr. Goldiamond treats Amanda's fear of Russian, using a program which builds on her current strengths and skills. In addition, we'll go into more detail about answering the first 2 questions. Where do we go from here? and where are we now, as well as briefly talk about programs. In sessions 3 and 4, we deal with motivation and how to identify what really motivates each of us. We call session 5, People Make Sense. In it, we use what we've learned about motivation to examine and dispel a number of misconceptions. In sessions 6 and 7, we get down to the nitty-gritty of program design and how to set up programs that work. In the final session, we take a detailed look at a program that does work.
One final example from an upcoming program is this amazing little rat who goes by the name of Rodent E. Lee. Many of the principles Dr. Goldiamond will be discussing can be demonstrated in the laboratory. Here, Rodent E. Lee demonstrates the effectiveness of something called backward programming.
Free food way down below. Then he was trying, we call the shaping, to press the lever to get the food. Then once that behavior was well acquired, and he could just really do it, then that having been done, he was put into that little elevator way up on top. And now he looks down around the elevator, and there's that lever down there. How do we get there?
So he's got to find a way to get there.
So then he learns the shape to pull on the latch. Then once he's got that mastered, now he's then put in front of the tunnel. And there is that good old elevator. So he goes through the tunnel, into the elevator, presses down, and you keep on working all the way down, backwards. And finally, the whole thing reels itself off in the exact opposite way. Now, this kind of sequence for training is what is known as a backward program. It's one of two types of backwards programming. This is a rather simple program. You can actually develop way more complex backward programs. But this one, it turned out that Rodent E. Lee performed before the crowned heads of Arizona.
By now, you should have a pretty good idea of the type of approach Dr. Goldiamond will be discussing in this series. What he calls constructional approaches are used by all of us every day. Step-by-step approaches to our own goals with success at each step typify such programs. To close, this conversation with Emmett Barlow sums up the attitude of people who use such approaches in their everyday lives.
You know, like, I would be ashamed to, really get up on a big stage and try to dance, although I do like to dance. I like, I love music. Like something like that, I would be, I would be kind of afraid of. But a small group with, just our club, I'm right there with them.
Incidentally, on this dancing business, you don't like to dance when you're part of a large group, but in an intimate group.
Right.
How different are you from a lot of other people who also don't like to dance when they're part of a large group, but do like to dance part of a small group? Or other people who in the presence of their friends, relax, but in the presence of a large group, feel ill at ease.
The research reported in this series was supported in part by grants from the State of Illinois Department of Mental Health. For study guide information, call TV